My son sent me a text message on my 65th birthday that broke my heart, but saved my bank account. He wrote, "Dad, stop calling us. Don't expect us to take care of you in your old age, because I have my own life and family now. Sell your big house and check yourself into a nursing home." I read the message twice, took a sip of my scotch, and walked to my wall safe. He didn't know that the house he told me to sell was the only thing keeping him out of prison. He didn't know that the luxury life he was living was funded by loans he had forgotten he signed. I didn't get mad. I just opened my ledger and decided to call in his debts. My name is Douglas Reed, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful son that the bank of Dad is officially closed. Before I continue, tell me in the comments if you think parents owe their adult children an inheritance, or if respect must be earned. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that justice is a dish best served cold. It was raining in Seattle, a relentless gray drizzle that tapped against the windows of my 4-bedroom colonial house, like a nervous finger. Inside, the silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that accumulates in a house when you have lived alone for 5 years. Today was my 65th birthday. I had not expected a party. I knew my wife, Catherine, was gone, and she was the one who used to fill this house with balloons and the smell of roasting chicken. But I had expected a call, just 5 minutes, just an acknowledgement that I was still breathing. I sat in my leather armchair, the one facing the fireplace where no fire burned. On the small side table sat my phone, black and silent. I had checked the volume 3 times to make sure I hadn't missed a notification. I hadn't. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the screen finally lit up. My heart did a pathetic little jump in my chest. I reached for it, my hand steady. I was a structural engineer for 40 years. I built bridges that withstood earthquakes. My hands do not shake. It was a text from Brandon, not a call, not a video chat with my grandson, Leo, just a block of text. I put on my reading glasses and focused on the words. "Dad, Monica and I have been talking. You're reaching retirement age officially today. We want to set some boundaries now to avoid awkwardness later. Don't expect us to take care of you or invite you to live with us when you get too old. I have my own life, my own family, and my own financial pressure. You need to be realistic. Sell your house, use the money to pay for a facility, and don't become a burden on us. Happy birthday." I read it once, then I read it again out loud, my voice sounding raspy in the empty room. Happy birthday. That was the kicker. He had buried the knife in my chest and then pasted a greeting card sticker on the handle. I looked around the living room. I looked at the grand piano that Brandon had learned to play on, the lessons costing me $300 a month for 6 years. He hadn't touched a key since he was 18. I looked at the mantel where a photo of his college graduation sat. I paid for that degree. I paid for the dorm where he partied, the books he didn't read, and the fraternity fees that bought him friends. A normal father might have cried. A weaker man might have called his son, begging for clarification, asking what he had done wrong, but I felt a strange transformation happening inside me. The heat of shame that had started to rise in my neck suddenly cooled. It froze. The engineer in me took over. I was looking at a structural failure. When a bridge shows signs of collapse, you don't weep over the concrete. You condemn it. You restrict access. You cut your losses. I set the phone down gently. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself 2 fingers of the single malt scotch I had been saving for a special occasion. I suppose this was special. It was the day my illusions died. I took a sip, letting the burn settle in my chest. Then I walked into my study. This room was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Behind the heavy oak desk was a painting of the Seattle skyline. I swung the frame aside. Behind it sat a steel wall safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 10, left to 55. The tumblers clicked with a satisfying mechanical precision. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. I didn't believe in keeping cash where it could burn. Instead, there were documents, stacks of them. Most people looked at me and saw a retired engineer living on a pension. They saw an old man driving a 5-year-old Ford truck. Even Brandon thought I was just getting by. He thought I was sitting on a nest egg that was slowly cracking. He was wrong. I reached into the safe and pulled out a thick black leather binder. I placed it on my desk and switched on the green banker's lamp. The light pulled on the cover. This was my ledger. 5 years ago, when I sold my shares in the construction firm, I walked away with $4 million after taxes. I never told Brandon. I wanted him to build his own character. I wanted him to work hard like I did. I failed. I opened the binder. Inside were plastic sleeves, and in each sleeve was a document. These weren't just sentimental scraps of paper. They were promissory notes. Legal, binding, notarized promissory notes. I turned to the first page. It was dated 10 years ago. Brandon had just graduated. He needed a car to show his clients he was a serious real estate agent. He wanted a Porsche Cayenne. I told him a Toyota was reliable. He told me image was everything. Monica, his girlfriend at the time, had sneered at my truck, so I bought him the Porsche. $80,000, but I made him sign. I remembered the moment clearly. He was laughing, dangling the keys, barely reading the paper I slid across the table. "Dad, why do we have to be so formal?" he had asked. I told him that business was business. He signed it with a flourish, a messy scroll that looked arrogant on the page. I ran my finger over the signature. Promissory note 001. Principal amount $80,000. Interest rate 2%. I turned the page. The wedding? Oh, that wedding. Monica wanted a vineyard in Napa Valley. She wanted imported orchids and a live string quartet. I suggested a nice church ceremony here in Seattle. She cried. She told Brandon I was ruining her dream. Brandon came to me, eyes downcast, asking for help. I wrote the check. $150,000. Promissory note 005, signed by both Brandon and Monica. They were so drunk on champagne, they probably thought it was a guest book. I kept turning the pages. The down payment on their penthouse, the bailout when Brandon's credit card maxed out after their trip to Europe, the seed money for Monica's failed boutique business. I stopped at the last page. It was from 6 months ago. Brandon had come to me, sweating, pale. He had gambled on a risky real estate flip and lost. He needed $50,000 to cover the gap, or he would lose his license. I gave it to him. I looked at the total at the bottom of my spreadsheet. $482,500. That was the principal. With the accrued interest, it was over $500,000. But the money wasn't the weapon. The weapon was a small paragraph at the bottom of every single note. Clause 4, Section B. I adjusted my glasses and read it aloud to the empty room. The lender, Douglas Reed, reserves the right to demand full repayment of the principal and accrued interest at any time, for any reason. This note is callable on demand. Upon receipt of a formal demand letter, the borrower has 30 days to settle the debt in full before legal proceedings and asset seizure commence. Callable on demand. Brandon had never read the fine print. He thought these were just formality papers to make his old man feel important. He thought I was a soft touch, a safety net that would always be there to catch him. I looked at the phone again. The text message was still there, glowing faintly. "Don't expect us to take care of you." I closed the ledger. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You want to talk about independence, son. You want to talk about having your own life. Fine. Let's see how much of a life you have when the bank forecloses on it." I didn't go to bed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from my printer tray. I sat down and uncapped my fountain pen. I began to draft a letter. It wasn't a letter to my son. It was a letter to my lawyer, Mr. Holloway. I wrote with a steady hand. "Dear Holloway, please prepare the necessary filings to activate Clause 8 of the Reed Family Trust immediately. Remove Brandon Reed as a beneficiary. Secondly, I am attaching copies of 15 promissory notes. I want you to issue a formal demand letter for the total amount to be sent to Brandon's office by courier on Monday morning." I paused. I looked at the photo of Leo, my grandson, on the corner of the desk. He was the only innocent one in this mess. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. If I didn't cut the rot out now, Leo would grow up to be just like his father, entitled, weak, cruel. I continued writing. If payment is not received within 30 days, initiate foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including his primary residence and personal vehicles. I signed my name, Douglas Arthur Reed. The sun was starting to rise over Seattle. The gray light filtered through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of being a father is heavy, especially when you're carrying a child who refuses to walk. But the burden of being a creditor, that is simple. It is just math. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. The text message from Brandon no longer hurt. In fact, I was almost grateful for it. He had finally given me the permission I needed to stop being his father and start being his teacher. He wanted me to sell my house. He wanted me to disappear into a nursing home so he could wait for me to die and inherit the rest. I took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter and hot. Monday was going to be a very interesting day for the real estate market in Seattle. My son was about to learn that when you burn a bridge, you better make sure you are not standing on it. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Rainier Tower was silent and fast. My ears popped as the doors slid open, revealing the polished marble lobby of Holloway and Associates. This was a place where fortunes were protected and lives were dismantled, usually with the stroke of a very expensive pen. I walked past the receptionist, who knew me by name, clutching my black leather ledger against my chest like a shield. I wasn't here today to build a bridge or design a foundation. I was here to demolish the ground my son was standing on. Robert Holloway was waiting for me. We had been friends for 30 years since the days when I was a site manager, and he was a public defender with holes in his shoes. Now he wore Italian suits and had eyes that had seen every variety of human greed imaginable. He didn't offer me coffee. He saw the look on my face and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. He sat behind his mahogany desk, a fortress of glass and steel with a view of the city that Brandon so desperately wanted to own. I didn't say a word. I just unlocked my phone and slid it across the desk to him. The text message from Brandon was glowing on the screen. Holloway put on his reading glasses. He read it in silence. His expression didn't change. He didn't gasp or shake his head. He just let out a long, slow breath through his nose. It is the kind of sound a doctor makes when he sees a tumor on an X-ray. He pushed the phone back to me. So, he set his voice low and growly. "It begins." I nodded. I told him that I was done waiting. I told him that the time for lectures and warnings was over. I placed the black ledger on his desk. Holloway opened it. He flipped through the pages of the promissory notes, his eyes scanning the dates, the amounts, and the signatures. He stopped at the note for the Porsche. He paused at the note for the wedding. He lingered on the note for the penthouse down payment. Then he looked up at me, a small, sharp smile playing on his lips. "You kept them," he said. "You actually kept them all." I told him that I never threw away a contract. Holloway closed the book and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Douglas," he said, "do you understand what you're holding here? This isn't just a list of loans. This is a nuclear option. Most parents give money to their children and call it a gift. They might say it is a loan, but they never document it. They never notorize it. And when the kid walks away, the parent has no legal standing. But this is different." He tapped the leather cover of the book. "These are demand notes, Douglas. Do you remember what I told you when we drafted these templates 10 years ago? I told you that the acceleration clause is the most dangerous weapon in contract law. Clause 4, Section B. It means you don't have to wait for him to miss a payment. You don't have to wait for him to go broke. You can demand full repayment of the entire principal plus interest simply because you feel like it." I asked him to explain the process. I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly what was going to happen to my son. Holloway stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the rainy streets of Seattle. "Here is exactly how it works," he said, turning back to face me. "We draft a formal demand letter today. We cite every single note in this book. We calculate the interest compounded annually at the federal minimum rate just to be generous, which brings the total to just under $500,000. We send this letter via certified mail to his office, not his home. His office. We want his secretary to sign for it. We want the timestamp." He paused, letting the weight of the strategy sink in. "Once that letter is signed for, the clock starts ticking. 30 days, Douglas. He has exactly 30 days to write you a check for $482,000. If he doesn't, and we both know he can't, he is in default. On day 31, we file a motion for summary judgment. Because these notes are notarized and the signatures are valid, there is no trial. There is no jury. The judge looks at the paper, sees the debt, and bangs the gavel." I asked him what happens after the judgment. Holloway walked back to his desk and leaned over, his eyes locking onto mine. "That is when the fun begins. We get a writ of execution. That gives the sheriff the authority to seize assets to satisfy the debt. We freeze his bank accounts. We garnish his wages. We put a lien on that fancy penthouse he loves so much. And since the penthouse is likely mortgaged to the hilt, our lien triggers a default with his mortgage lender. The bank will foreclose on him before we even have to lift a finger." He sat down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We will strip him, Douglas. We will strip him of his credit score, his assets, his reputation, and his ability to borrow a single dime from anyone in this country for the next 7 years. He won't be able to rent an apartment. He won't be able to lease a car. He will be financial dust." I looked at the ledger. I thought about Brandon when he was 5 years old, learning to ride a bike. I remembered the way he used to look at me, like I was the strongest man in the world. I remembered the day I taught him to tie his shoes. A wave of nausea hit me. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to destroy my own son's life over a text message? I looked at Holloway. I told him that maybe this was too much. Maybe I should just cut him off from the will and leave it at that. Maybe I should just let him drift away. He is still my boy, Robert. He is still the kid I carried on my shoulders. Holloway didn't blink. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a file. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the mahogany and stopped right in front of me. "Open it," he said. I opened the file. It was a background check, a financial investigation report. I asked him what this was. "I ran this on Brandon 6 months ago," Holloway said. "When you told me he asked for that $50,000 for the real estate flip, I wanted to see if the deal was real." It wasn't. There was no real estate deal, Douglas. He used your $50,000 to pay off a gambling debt to a bookie in Las Vegas. I stared at the report. The numbers were there. The wire transfers. The dates. Holloway leaned forward, his voice hard and uncompromising. "He didn't just disrespect you, Douglas. He has been stealing from you. He has been lying to you. And that text message, that wasn't an emotional outburst. That was a calculation. He thinks he has squeezed the lemon dry, and now he is tossing the rind in the trash. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you are just a lonely old man who will take the abuse because you are desperate for connection." He pointed a finger at me. "If you don't do this, you aren't saving him. You are enabling a monster. He is 32 years old. If he doesn't learn consequences now, he never will. And what about your grandson? What about Leo? Do you want Leo to be raised by a man who treats his own father like a disposable resource?" The mention of Leo was the final straw. I thought about my grandson watching his father, learning from him. I thought about the cycle of entitlement and selfishness continuing for another generation. I closed the file. The hesitation evaporated. The engineer was back. The structural failure had been confirmed. The demolition order had to be signed. I looked at Holloway. I told him to do it. Holloway nodded. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Sarah, bring in the notary and the standard demand letter templates and get the trust documents for the Reed estate. We are making some amendments." For the next hour, the only sound in the office was the scratching of my pen against paper. I signed the amendments to the trust, removing Brandon completely. I established a new irrevocable trust for Leo, accessible only when he turned 25, with a clause that required him to be employed and drug-free. Then came the demand letter. Holloway handed it to me. It was brief. It was cold. It was terrifyingly formal. Outstanding debt obligations. Dear Mr. Reed, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Douglas Reed. Pursuant to the terms of the attached promissory notes, we are hereby exercising the acceleration clause, effective immediately. You're required to remit the total sum of $482,500 within 30 calendar days. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. I held the pen over the signature line. My hand didn't shake, but my heart felt like a heavy stone in my chest. This was it, the point of no return. Once this letter went into the mail, there was no taking it back. I wasn't just asking for money, I was declaring war. I thought about the text message one last time. Don't expect us to take care of you. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. Holloway took the letter and placed it in a crisp white envelope. He stamped it with a red stamp that said, "Certified mail. Return receipt requested." "It goes out in the morning run," Holloway said. "He will get it by Monday." I stood up. I felt tired, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. The ambiguity was gone. The relationship was no longer based on guilt or obligation. It was now based on a contract. I asked Holloway one last question. I asked him if he thought Brandon would call me when he got the letter. Holloway stood up and shook my hand. His grip was firm. "He will call you, Douglas. He will scream. He will cry. He will threaten. But for the first time in his life, he will be calling you with respect. Because for the first time in his life, he will realize that you are not just his father. You are the man who holds the keys to his cage. I walked out of the office and back to the elevator. The doors closed, sealing me in. I watched the numbers count down on the display. 40, 30, 20. I was going back down to the street level, back to the rain, back to my empty house. But I wasn't going back as a victim. I was going back as the plaintiff. And God help the defendant when the court is in session. While I was sitting in a lawyer's office, signing away their inheritance, my son and his wife were sitting at the most expensive brunch spot in downtown Seattle. The Emerald Lounge was the kind of place where a glass of orange juice cost $15 and the walls were lined with velvet. It was a place for people who wanted to be seen, and Brandon and Monica lived to be seen. They were seated at a prime window table, bathed in the same gray light that felt so heavy to me. But to them, it probably looked like silver. Brandon's phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. He glanced at it, and a slow, arrogant grin spread across his face. He didn't pick up the phone to call me. He didn't show a flicker of concern. He simply turned the screen toward Monica so she could read my text. He folded. Brandon said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "I told you he would. The old man is predictable." Monica read the message where I had lied about selling the house and moving into a nursing home. She let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She clapped her hands together, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. That ring was unpaid for, just like everything else in their lives. But in that moment, she looked like a queen who had just conquered a new territory. "Finally," she said, taking a sip of her mimosa. "I thought he was going to drag this out for months. I was already looking up lawyers to declare him mentally incompetent. But this is so much easier." "Did he say when the sale goes through?" Brandon took a bite of his lobster. Benedict, chewing slowly. "He says next week. A quick sale to an investment firm. That means cash, Monica. Liquid cash. Zillow estimates that house is worth $1.5 million. Even if he sells it for $1.2 for a quick close, that is a fortune." They didn't talk about my health. They didn't ask which nursing home I had chosen. They didn't wonder if I was scared or lonely. Instead, they immediately pulled out a napkin and a gold pen. Monica started writing. She wasn't writing a thank you note. She was doing math. "Okay," she said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Let's be conservative. Let's say the net proceeds are $1 million after he pays off whatever small mortgage might be left. A nursing home costs about $6,000 a month for a decent one. But why should we pay for a decent one? He doesn't need luxury. He just needs a bed and a cafeteria." Brandon nodded, flagging down the waiter for another round of drinks. "Exactly. There is a state-subsidized facility in Tacoma. It's fine. It's clean. If we put him there, the cost is negligible. That leaves the bulk of the equity untouched." Monica drew a circle on the napkin. "We need to access that capital now, Brandon. We can't wait for him to actually die. That could take 20 years. You need to get power of attorney over his accounts the second the check clears. Tell him you need to manage his portfolio to protect him from scams. He trusts you." He's pathetic like that. I am watching this scene in my mind's eye, and it makes my blood run cold. But what happens next is even worse. They began to spend the money. They spent my life's work in between bites of toast. "First, the debts," Brandon said, though he waved his hand dismissively. "I'll clear the credit cards. That's about 40 grand. No big deal. But then, babe, look at this." He pulled up a picture on his phone. It was a listing for a brand new Range Rover customized with matte black paint and red leather interior. "I can't show up to the firm in that 3-year-old BMW anymore," he said. "It's embarrassing. The partners are judging me. This car screams success. It's only $120,000. If I put $50 down from Dad's money, the monthly payments are nothing. Monica leaned in, scrolling through her own phone. We are definitely upgrading the trip to the Maldives. No more economy class. We are flying first-class Emirates. And I want to stay in the water villa with the private slide. It's $10,000 a night, but we deserve it. We have been so stressed dealing with your dad's drama. We need to decompress. She looked at her husband, her face serious, and Brandon, the Birkin. You promised if this deal went through, you promised me the Himalayan Birkin. The reseller has one for $30,000. It's an investment. It holds value better than gold. Brandon grabbed her hand and kissed it. Consider it done. The moment the money hits his account, I'll transfer a management fee to myself, and we go shopping. They clinked their glasses together. To family, they said. But they didn't mean me. They meant themselves. They meant the shiny, hollow image of a family they were trying to project to the world. Under the table, Brandon's leg was bouncing nervously. He checked his phone again, but this time he wasn't looking at my text. He was looking at a notification from his bank. Insufficient funds. His credit card had been declined for the parking meter earlier that morning. He swiped the notification away, his face tightening for a split second before he forced the smile back on. Don't worry about the bill, he told Monica. I'll put it on the emergency card. We are rich now. It's just a matter of logistics. They laughed loud and raucous, oblivious to the fact that the waiter was looking at them with disdain. They were celebrating a victory that hadn't happened. They were dividing the spoils of a war they didn't know they had already lost. Monica looked out the window at the rainy street. You know, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I almost feel bad for him. Leaving that big house must be hard. It's full of memories of your mom. Brandon shrugged. He needs to move on. He's been holding on to the past for too long. We are doing him a favor, really. We are pushing him to let go. We are the good guys here. They truly believed it. That was the scariest part. They had twisted reality so completely that in their minds, stripping an old man of his home and dumping him in a state facility was an act of mercy. They finished their meal, leaving a messy table and a tip that was insultingly small. Let's go to the dealership, Brandon said as they stood up. I just want to test drive it just to get a feel for it. Monica linked her arm through his, and then let's go to the travel agent. I want to book those tickets today. I want to post the confirmation on Instagram tonight. Everyone needs to know we are going to the Maldives. They walked out of the restaurant, stepping over a puddle, heads held high. They looked like a power couple. They looked like winners. They had no idea that across town, a courier was picking up a thick white envelope from the desk of Robert Holloway. They had no idea that the timer on their life had already started ticking down. They were planning a vacation, but they should have been planning a funeral for their lifestyle. The arrogance was blinding them, and I was counting on it. I needed them to be high on greed, so the fall would break every bone in their financial bodies. 2 weeks had passed since I instructed Holloway to prepare the legal guillotine. 2 weeks of absolute radio silence from my end. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just sat in my house surrounded by the ghosts of 40 years of marriage and waited. I knew they would come. Greed has a very specific gravitational pull, and my house was the sun they were orbiting. They chose Thanksgiving for their invasion. It was poetic in a sick sort of way. A holiday dedicated to gratitude was about to be turned into an appraisal session. I saw the Porsche pull into the driveway at 10 in the morning. I had paid for that car, but as I watched Brandon slam the door, I realized I hadn't paid for the arrogance he stepped out with, that he had developed all on his own. Monica stepped out next, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast Seattle sky. She looked at the house, not with the warmth of someone coming home, but with the critical squint of a developer looking at a teardown project. And then there was Leo. My grandson scrambled out of the back seat, holding a plastic dinosaur, the only innocent thing in a 50-mi radius. I opened the door before they could knock. I wanted to control the threshold. Leo saw me, and his face lit up. "Grandpa!" he shouted, dropping the dinosaur and running toward me with his arms wide open. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone over the last fortnight, cracked a little. I bent down to catch him, but before Leo could reach me, Monica's hand shot out. She grabbed the collar of his jacket, jerking him back. "Leo, honey?" "No," she said, her voice sharp and performative. "Don't jump on Grandpa. Remember what we said. Grandpa is old and tired. You might hurt him or catch something." I stood up slowly, my joints clicking. I wasn't sick. I wasn't frail. I had run 3 miles on the treadmill that morning, but to them, I was already a corpse that hadn't gotten the memo. "Hello, Dad," Brandon said, stepping past me into the hallway without shaking my hand. He smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. He scanned the living room, his eyes darting to the corners, checking for dust and deterioration. "We brought a turkey," Monica said, brushing past me as well. "It's pre-cooked from Whole Foods. We didn't want you stressing out over the oven. At your age, gas appliances can be dangerous." She didn't wait for a thank you. She walked straight into the dining room. I followed them, feeling less like the host and more like a ghost haunting my own hallway. I expected a family lunch. I expected awkward conversation about sports or the weather. I was naive. They hadn't come to eat. They had come to tag. Monica reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a stack of neon on yellow Post-it notes. She peeled one off. The sound was a sharp zip that cut through the quiet house. She walked over to the mahogany sideboard, a piece Catherine and I had bought in London 30 years ago. She slapped the yellow note onto the polished wood. On it, she had written one word in thick black marker. Keep. I stood by the kitchen island, sipping black coffee, watching this violation unfold. I didn't say a word. I became the observer. I became the predator hiding in the tall grass, watching the prey graze, unaware that the wind had already shifted. "What are you doing, Monica?" I asked, my voice calm and flat. She didn't even look at me. She moved to the china cabinet. "Zip." Another note. "Keep." "Oh, just organizing, Douglas," she said breezily. "Brandon told us you were selling the house next week. We are just helping you sort out what is valuable and what is trash. You can't take all this heavy furniture to a nursing home. The rooms there are tiny. You won't have space. So, we are marking the things we are willing to take off your hands." Willing to take off my hands, as if they were doing me a favor by looting my life. Brandon walked in from the living room. He had a tape measure in his hand. He was measuring the floor-to-ceiling windows. "These drapes have to go," he muttered to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "They are dated. If we want to flip this place or rent it out before selling, we need more light." Open concept. We should probably knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. He turned to me, snapping the tape measure back into its casing. "Dad, did you keep the blueprints for the renovation you did in '95? I need to know which walls are load-bearing." Monica wants to create a flow for entertaining. I took another sip of coffee. The bitterness was grounding. "I thought you wanted me to sell the house to pay for my care," I said. "Why do you care about load-bearing walls?" Brandon laughed a nervous, dismissive sound. "Well, yeah, eventually. But we need to maximize the value first. Or maybe we keep it as a rental property for a few years. Let the market appreciate." You don't know about these things, Dad. You are old school. Let me handle the assets. You just focus on resting. Resting. That was their code word for dying. I watched Monica move to the fireplace. Above it hung the oil painting of the Seattle skyline, the one that hid my wall safe. She stared at it, tilting her head. "This is hideous," she declared. "Zip a note. Sell." She slapped the note right onto the canvas. I felt a surge of rage, hot and electric, but I pushed it down. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully sprung yet. I needed them to commit fully. I needed to see exactly how far they would go. They moved through the house like a swarm of locusts. Zip. Keep on the leather armchair. Zip. Trash on my collection of engineering journals. Zip. Keep on the silver tea set Catherine loved. They didn't ask me a single question. They didn't ask, "Dad, does this chair mean anything to you?" They didn't ask, "Douglas, would you like to keep this photo album?" To them, I had already ceased to exist as a person with desires and memories. I was just an obstacle between them and the inventory. Leo was sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. He saw the yellow notes sticking to everything like sores. "Grandpa," he whispered, "why is Mommy putting stickers on your stuff?" I walked over and sat down next to him on the floor. My niece protested, but I ignored them. I lowered my voice. "Because, Leo," I said, stroking his hair, "your mommy and daddy are playing a game. They think they are shopping." "Can I play?" Leo asked. "No," I said softly. "This is a game for grown-ups who have forgotten how to be good. You stick with your dinosaur." Dinosaurs are honest. If they want to eat you, they roar. They don't smile and bring you a turkey. Monica walked back into the room. She had made her way to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The sanctuary I hadn't let anyone enter since Catherine passed. "Brandon, come here," she shouted. I stood up and followed them. Monica was standing in front of Catherine's vanity table. On it sat her jewelry box. It wasn't locked. I never locked it, because I like to open it sometimes and smell her perfume. Monica had the box open. She was holding up Catherine's pearl necklace against her own throat, looking in the mirror. "This is vintage," she said, her voice trembling with greed. "Real saltwater pearls. This must be worth $5,000 alone." "Put it down," I said. The room went silent. It was the first time I had given a command. Monica turned, her face flushing with irritation. She didn't put it down. She clasped it around her neck. "Oh, relax, Douglas. It's just gathering dust here. Catherine would want someone to wear it. Someone young. Someone alive. It's a waste to leave it in a dark room. I'm doing you a favor by archiving it." Archiving it. Brandon stepped between,